Welcome back to Casual Watch Reviews. Today we're looking at a pretty cool chronograph from a friend of mine who owns a micro brand called Detroit Mint. You've seen me review their watches on the channel before. He's just released this new Cobra chronograph, and it comes in this black dial version and then a very cool looking white dial version, the panda and the reverse panda, you could say. These are bi-compax mechanical chronographs, and they're inspired by vintage chronographs from the 1960s. Dave was a big fan of the Ford versus Ferrari film, and it really spurned his ideas for this watch on, similar to what he did with the Once Upon a Time in Hollywood watch that we reviewed earlier on the show. These watches are retailing for $425, and you're getting a lot of watch for your money. Not only are you getting a distinctive bi-compax designed chronograph, but you're getting a fully mechanical chronograph movement. This watch uses the Seagull ST19, not the standard Seagull movement. Dave's had this upgraded to have a swan neck regulation system in it. And if anybody's not familiar with swan neck regulation, it's an extra piece on the regulation that allows you to get a very slight micro adjustment with a screw rather than moving the levers around. So it actually allows you to regulate the watch a lot better. Now, you're not going to get cost regulation from a movement like this. The movements are coming from China, which is where the majority of Seagull movements are made. And then Dave, when they come to his workshop, he then assembles the watches there, and then he puts the watches on a time grapher just to make sure that they're all regulated properly, even though he's paid for additional regulation at the factory. Well, let's look at the design now of these two watches, and they really capture that 1960s racing aesthetic, I think. And then he's used the Cobra logo on there, very famously used on the Shelby Cobras. I think the logo looks slightly better on the black version because it's in silver, so you can see the detail of the Cobra a little bit better than on the white dial version where it's all in black, although I think the white dial is personally my favorite. One of the things to note on this movement is, although it does have a continuous running seconds, which we can see here on the sub dial, Seagull movements aren't hacking. This is a continuous 60 seconds. This would usually be something that bothered me, but as the main purpose of this watch is as a timing mechanism, as a chronograph, obviously you can start and stop the chronograph, the timing hand, whenever you like with the pushers, and it's a quick stop and reset, and that works really well on these movements. It's a hand wound movement, and that means that the rotor doesn't obscure the beautiful Seagull movement. The original manufacturers of these Seagull movements bought the movements from a Swiss manufacturer called Venus, and all of the equipment was sent over to China, and they've been making these movements there ever since. There's a couple of different companies that make them. You can see some decoration work on the bridge, and they've got those blued screws. Now, these are blued painted screws, I suspect. They're not. On some of the higher end watches, the screws are blued through a process of heating them, whereas I suspect these are just painted. It's a beautiful movement to look at. If you're into chronographs, these movements where you can start and stop them and see everything work, and the hand wound as well, even though it's not automatic, the watch is still quite thick, 13.5mm thickness. I think that's slightly accentuated by the case shape. We've reviewed a similar cased watch like this before. The problem that watch had, which I think this one has a little bit, but not as bad as that one, is the crown to grip. Because of the way that the case is shaped, it can be a little tricky to grip at times. I think the crown in future iterations maybe could do with being a little bit bigger, but that's my only grumble with this, to be honest, is just the size of the crown. One of the interesting things with the chronograph is not only are you measuring the full 60 seconds on the main dial of the watch, then you've got the sub dial obviously as part of the chronograph. Instead of a tachymeter, he's put 1/100th of a minute timing around the outside, which actually makes it a lot easier for timing than having to do a mental calculation with a tachymeter. And I think this was something that he took from those vintage watches of the time. The watch itself, let's look at those measurements. So it's a 40mm case diameter, 46mm from lug to lug, a 13mm 40mm thickness and a 20mm lug width. And it comes with this very cool racing strap. And I think there's other options as well. There's a rally style strap that is, I believe, is handmade in the US. The standard strap that this comes with, the racing strap, leather strap, has this deployant clasp on it as well, which is a really nice touch. Highly polished case. The look of the dial is also really accentuated by that top hat sapphire crystal that Dave's added on here, which gives a nice bevel around the edge and no real distortion to the dial. The sub-dials on the black one are in silver, and then in the white one are in black. Both highly legible. I think even more so on the white dial, you can see the 100th of a second a little bit clearer. The minute hand goes all the way to the outside minute track, easily legible between the two, and those hands, of course, are loomed as well. So let's just cut to a quick loom shot here so you can see that. Looking closely at the dial now, we can see applied indices with a slight bit of loom on them. Everything else is printed on the dial. The dial itself, they're very flat looking. There's no sunburst effect to them, which I think suits this racing style perfectly. The black is executed very well. I'm a huge fan of the red second hand that he's used here, and thankfully he's used it on both the white and the black version. If I was going to pick one, I'd go with the white. I'm a big fan of the way that the red plays with the white dial. Also, I think it's more legible than the black one, even though there's not much in it really. Overall, I think he's done a really good job of these watches. I think for the price, $425, you can't go wrong with this. Dave assembles all of these himself. He warranties them himself as well. So if you've got any problems, you return it straight back to Dave instead of it having to go back to a Chinese movement manufacturer or something along those lines. They also come with a really cool watch roll as well. I'm a huge fan of watches coming in watch rolls. I'm not a big fan of the ornate boxes, especially on micro brands as well, because you wonder, could they have spent less money on the box and more money on the watch itself? Dave includes a really nice watch roll which has not only space for the watch itself, additional 2 watches, or a lot of additional straps. I'm really interested to know what you guys think, so let me know in the comments section down below. As always, I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you next time on Casual Watch Reviews.